The quiet hum of cicadas was a fragile peace until a patrol car pulled up. One reckless officer was about to discover that some daughters on leave carry more weight than he could possibly imagine. The quiet hum of the cicadas was the only sound breaking the evening stillness. I sat on the porch swing of my mother's house, a glass of iced tea sweating in my hand, watching the sky bleed from orange to a deep violet. This was my first real leave in 3 years. No drills, no deployments, no ops briefings that determined the fate of men thousands of miles away. Just the familiar creak of the old wooden swing and the scent of my mother's prize-winning roses. It was a fragile, perfect peace, a peace shattered by the slow, predatory crawl of a police cruiser. It rolled past the house once, then looped around the block and came back, parking directly across the street. My body, a machine honed by 2 decades of relentless training, went on low alert. My breathing evened out, my posture relaxed on the surface, but my eyes catalogued everything. 2 officers. The driver, older, looked tired. The passenger, younger and wired with a nervous energy, was the one staring at me. He was the problem. I could feel it in the way he held his shoulders, a rigid arrogance that screamed insecurity. They got out of the car, their boots scuffing on the pavement with deliberate slowness. The younger one, Officer Miller according to his name tag, strode onto the lawn, his partner Davis hanging back near the sidewalk. "Evening," Miller said. It wasn't a greeting. It was an accusation. "Officer," I replied, my voice level. I didn't get up from the swing. I gave him a small, polite nod. In my world, you never cede ground unless it's a tactical decision. This wasn't. This was my mother's porch. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his hand resting on the butt of his sidearm. A classic intimidation move. "Enjoying the evening," I said calmly. "On my mother's property." He smirked, a nasty little twist of his lips. "Your mother's property? We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area. Loitering, drug deals." He looked me up and down, taking in my simple gray t-shirt, my worn jeans, and my bare feet. His gaze lingered on my skin. The message was clear. "I can assure you, officer, there's nothing suspicious happening here." My heart rate was a steady 60 beats per minute. I've had conversations with warlords who were less threatening than this man thought he was. "I'll be the judge of that," he snapped. "Let's see some ID." "I don't have it on me. I'm just sitting on the porch." "You don't have ID?" His voice rose, a performance for his partner, for the empty street. "You're in a high-crime area, refusing to identify yourself. That gives me probable cause." "Probable cause for what, exactly?" I kept my voice soft. The louder he got, the quieter I became. It was a technique that could unravel a man from the inside out. It was working on him. A vein throbbed in his temple. "Probable cause to search you for weapons or contraband," he spat, taking another step closer, invading the bubble of my personal space. The scent of stale coffee and aggression rolled off him. His partner Davis finally spoke up. "Miller, she's just sitting there. Let's just run the address and—" "Stay out of this, Davis," Miller barked, not taking his eyes off me. He was inches from the porch steps now, looking down on me. He thought he had all the power. "Stand up. Put your hands on your head." I didn't move. I took a slow sip of my iced tea. "Officer, with all due respect, you have no legal grounds to search me. I am on private property, and I have committed no crime. I know my rights." That was the spark that lit the fuse. My calm, my refusal to be cowed, my knowledge of the law. It was a direct challenge to his fragile authority. His face contorted with rage. "Your rights," he sneered. "You people always want to talk about your rights." He lunged forward, up the 2 short steps of the porch, grabbing for my arm. My training, my instincts, screamed at me. A dozen ways to disable him flashed through my mind before he could even complete the movement. I could break his wrist, dislocate his shoulder, drop him to the ground before he could even register the pain. But I didn't. I was on leave. I was a daughter on her mother's porch. I simply pulled my arm back, out of his reach. "Do not touch me, officer." The rejection, the defiance sent him over the edge. In that split second, he wasn't a police officer. He was just a bully who'd been told no. He drew his hand back, his knuckles white. The world seemed to slow down. I saw the movement telegraph in his shoulder, the tightening of his jaw, the flash of fury in his eyes. I could have stopped it. I chose not to. I needed to see just how far he would go. The sound was a sharp, ugly crack that echoed in the humid night air. His open palm connected with my cheek. My head snapped to the side, the force of it rocking me on the swing. A stinging, electric fire spread across my face. For a moment there was nothing but the high-pitched ringing in my ears and the metallic taste of blood where my teeth had cut the inside of my cheek. The cicadas went silent. Officer Davis audibly gasped. Miller stood over me, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and satisfaction. He had finally gotten a reaction. He just had no idea what that reaction would be. I remained perfectly still for a count of 3, letting the pain register, letting the moment hang in the air like a guillotine. Then, slowly, deliberately, I turned my head back to face him. The woman who was enjoying a peaceful evening was gone. The part of me I kept locked away, the part forged in the crucibles of deserts and mountains and the darkest corners of the world, was now looking out through my eyes. I focused on him, my gaze so cold and precise it could have stripped paint. A tiny, almost imperceptible smile touched my lips as I watched the blood drain from his face. He saw the shift. He felt it, and I let him feel it for one long, terrifying second before I spoke, my voice no longer soft, but flat, hard, and impossibly calm. "Officer Miller," I said, my words cutting through the silence like shards of glass, "you have just made the single greatest mistake of your career." The bravado in Officer Miller's eyes flickered, replaced for a nanosecond by a primal fear. He'd hit what he thought was a stray dog, and it had turned out to be a wolf. But his pride, brittle as it was, wouldn't let him back down. He puffed out his chest, his hand instinctively going back to his weapon. "You're threatening an officer?" he blustered, his voice a half-octave too high. "That's a felony. You're under arrest." I didn't move. I didn't even blink. "No, I'm not," I said, my voice still unnervingly quiet. "You're not going to arrest me. You're not going to touch me again. What you're going to do is stand there and listen." I shifted my gaze to his partner. "Officer Davis, your partner just assaulted a civilian on her own property without cause. That's a Class C felony in this state. He did it in front of a witness you. Your failure to intervene makes you an accessory. You have about 30 seconds to decide if his career is worth yours." Davis paled, his eyes wide as saucers. He looked from me to Miller, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "Miller, for God's sake, listen to her. We need to call the sergeant. We need to just go." "She's playing you, Davis. Don't be an idiot," Miller yelled, but the conviction was gone from his voice. He was a cornered animal, all snarling teeth and panicked eyes. His hand was trembling slightly. I catalogued it. A tremor under duress. Poor trigger discipline. In a firefight, he'd be a liability. He'd be the first one down, or worse, he'd shoot a friendly. "I'm not playing," I said, bringing my focus back to Miller. "I am stating facts. Fact 1, you crossed a line you can't uncross. Fact 2, you have no idea who I am, but you're about to find out." Just then, the screen door creaked open behind me. My mother stood there, a floral apron over her dress, her face a mask of confusion and fear. "Jasmine? What's going on? Who are these men?" My body tensed. This was the one thing I couldn't control, the one variable I hadn't accounted for. Her presence. The sight of her, so fragile and so fierce, sent a surge of pure, cold fury through me. This wasn't an abstract violation of rights anymore. This man had brought his ugliness to her doorstep. He had put that look of fear on her face. I stood up slowly from the swing, never breaking eye contact with Miller. I turned my body slightly, shielding my mother from his direct line of sight. "It's all right, Mama. Just a misunderstanding. Go back inside. I'll handle it." "But your face," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the red mark blooming on my cheek. "Go inside, Mama," I repeated, and this time my voice carried an authority that even she, the woman who raised me, had never heard before. It was the voice I used when the rounds were flying and lives were on the line. It was the voice of command. She hesitated, then nodded, her eyes welling with tears before she retreated back into the house, the door clicking softly shut. The click of that door was like the cocking of a hammer. I turned my full attention back to the two officers. The last vestige of Jasmine, the daughter, vanished. Commander Hayes was now on deck. I reached into the back pocket of my jeans and pulled out my phone. Miller flinched, his hand jerking toward his gun. "What are you doing? Drop it." "Calm down, officer," I said with a sigh, holding the phone up with 2 fingers. "I'm not calling 911. I'm making a call to my direct supervisor. I have a duty to report this incident." His face twisted in a smug sneer. "Oh yeah? You going to call your manager at the coffee shop? Tell him I was mean to you." I ignored him. I swiped the screen and hit a single number on my speed dial. It rang once before it was picked up. The voice on the other end was gravelly and all business. "Go for Shepard." "Shepard, this is Nomad," I said, my voice crisp and professional. The porch, the cicadas, the 2 small-town cops all faded away. I was back in my element. "I have a situation." "Nomad? What's your status?" "You're on leave," he said, a note of concern in his voice. "Status is compromised. I'm at my mother's residence, coordinates on file. I have 2 LEOs, local department, who have become problematic. One has initiated hostile physical contact." There was a pause on the other end, pregnant and heavy. The air grew colder. I could hear the faint sound of furious typing. Miller was watching me, his face a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. The word nomad had landed wrong. It wasn't a name, it was a designation. Define hostile physical contact nomad. Shepard's voice was dangerously low. He struck me, unprovoked. Silence. Utter deafening silence from the phone. Then a quiet, controlled exhale. "Understood. Are you contained?" "Affirmative. The situation is stable but requires command-level intervention. The subjects are Officer Miller, badge number 714, and Officer Davis, badge number 822, of the Northwood Police Department. I need you to make the call. This is now a matter of operational security." "Consider it done," Shepard said. "A support package is being routed to your location. ETA 7 minutes. Do not engage further. Await their arrival. Shepard out." I lowered the phone and slid it back into my pocket. I looked at Miller, whose face had gone from white to a sickly gray. He'd heard enough to understand that this was no longer a traffic stop. This was something else entirely. What was that?" he stammered. "Who did you call?" I gave him that same cold, terrifying smile. "Help," I said. "Help is on the way." Davis was frantically whispering into his radio, his back to us. Miller just stood there, paralyzed. The evening peace was gone, replaced by a humming tension, an anticipation of something vast and powerful descending upon our quiet little street. For a full minute, nothing happened. Miller started to get a little of his color back, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Maybe he thought I was bluffing. Maybe he thought it was all an elaborate prank. Then we heard it. It wasn't the sound of sirens. It was a sound that didn't belong in a sleepy suburban neighborhood. A low, rhythmic thumping, distant at first, but growing louder with terrifying speed. It was a sound I knew like my own heartbeat, the sound of rotor blades chopping through the air. Not one, but 2. 2 very large, very fast, and very close helicopters, bearing down on us from the darkness. The thumping grew into a chest-rattling roar that shook the windows of my mother's house. Streetlights flickered as 2 sleek, black helicopters, unmarked, menacing, and utterly alien to this world of manicured lawns and picket fences, materialized out of the night sky. They weren't police choppers or news crews. They were MH-60M Blackhawks, the kind that don't show up unless something has gone catastrophically wrong. They didn't land. They didn't need to. One hovered with deafening precision directly over the police cruiser, its searchlight snapping on and bathing Miller and Davis in a brilliant, merciless white glare. The other established a wider perimeter, circling the block like a great bird of prey. The downdraft tore at the leaves on the trees and whipped my hair across my stinging cheek. Miller and Davis were frozen in the spotlight, hands shielding their eyes, their mouths agape in sheer disbelief. This was outside their every frame of reference. This was an invasion. From the hovering Blackhawk, 4 figures descended on fast ropes, landing on the pavement with the practiced, silent grace of ghosts. They weren't wearing police uniforms. They were clad in tactical gear, all black, armed with short-barreled rifles held at a low ready. Their faces were obscured by helmets and night vision goggles. They moved with an economy of motion that was both beautiful and terrifying, fanning out to secure the area, their weapons never pointing directly at the 2 officers, but covering them with an unmistakable promise of overwhelming force. One of them, clearly the team lead, strode towards the porch. He moved with a confident, rolling gait I knew well. As he stepped out of the direct wash of the rotor blades and into the ambient light of the porch, he raised his goggles. It was Stone, 6'4" of solid muscle and grim professionalism, with a jagged scar that cut through his left eyebrow. My second in command. He stopped at the bottom of the steps, his eyes flicking from my face to the 2 paralyzed cops, then back to me. His gaze lingered for a half-second on my cheek, and a muscle in his jaw clenched so hard I could see it from 10 feet away. "Commander," he said, his voice a low rumble just beneath the sound of the rotors. "You okay, ma'am?" He didn't call me nomad. Not here, not in front of them. He was already controlling the narrative. "I'm fine, Stone," I replied, my voice steady. "Secure the scene. No local comms in or out. I want their dashcam and bodycam footage." "Already on it," he grunted. Another member of his team was already at the cruiser, a small device in his hand that would wirelessly rip every bit of data from their systems. The 2 officers were completely surrounded. Stone turned his attention to them. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence was enough. "Officers Miller and Davis," he said, his voice cutting through the noise like a razor. "My name is Master Sergeant Stone. You will place your sidearms on the ground, slowly. You will then place your hands on your heads and await instruction. You will do this now." It wasn't a request. Davis complied immediately, his hands shaking so violently he almost dropped his gun. He looked like a man who was ready to confess to every crime in history just to make this stop. Miller hesitated. His mind was clearly struggling to process the scale of his miscalculation. A moment ago, he was the law. Now, he was a bug under a microscope. "Officer Miller," Stone's voice dropped, becoming even quieter, which was infinitely more dangerous. "Do not make me repeat myself." With a clatter, Miller's gun hit the pavement. He raised his hands to his head. Just then, a black, unmarked sedan, the kind that blends into traffic until you realize it has way too many antennas, screeched to a halt behind the police car. A man in a tailored suit stepped out of the passenger side. He was older, with silver hair and the weary eyes of someone who spends his life cleaning up messes. This was Shepard's man, the fixer. He walked calmly through the cordon of my operators, his expensive shoes crunching on the asphalt. He carried a tablet. He didn't even glance at the 2 cops. He came straight to me on the porch. "Commander Hayes," he said with a polite nod, "General Shepard sends his profound apologies for this disturbance to your leave." "It wasn't his disturbance to make, Mr. Shaw," I replied. "Indeed." Shaw's eyes flicked to Miller, a flicker of profound distaste in his expression. He looked at my cheek. "The general has been in direct contact with the governor. The governor, in turn, has had a very spirited conversation with the chief of police. I believe these 2 officers have been instructed to expect a call." As if on cue, Davis's radio, which one of my men had placed on the hood of the cruiser, crackled to life. A panicked voice, tinny and distant under the roar of the helicopters, shouted, "Davis! Miller, what is your status? Who the hell is in your airspace? The chief is screaming. He's on his way down there. He says to stand down and comply. I repeat, stand down and—" Stone gestured, and one of his men simply reached over and switched the radio off. The silence that followed was somehow louder than the rotor wash. Shaw turned his tablet towards me. It showed a live satellite feed of our street. He swiped the screen, bringing up 2 personnel files. Miller and Davis. Every commendation, every complaint, every black mark and blemish on their records displayed in stark detail. "We have everything," Shaw said simply. "The dashcam footage confirms your version of events completely." Officer Miller switched off his body camera 30 seconds before approaching you. A clear violation of department policy. Officer Davis's remained on. He paused. We have high-resolution audio and video of the entire encounter, including the assault. I nodded. What's the play? The official story, Shaw said, will be that this was a multi-agency training exercise that unfortunately coincided with a routine police stop. A regrettable, but understandable, blue-on-blue misunderstanding. The helicopters are part of a DHS urban training initiative. These officers will be debriefed and asked to sign non-disclosure agreements so stringent they won't be able to tell their wives what brand of coffee I drink. And unofficially? I asked. Shaw's expression hardened. Unofficially, these two men will be given a choice. They can resign from the force, effective immediately, with their pensions intact, but with a permanent flag on their records that ensures they will never carry a badge or a gun in any official capacity, again, anywhere in this country. Or they can face federal charges. Assault on a federal officer, a title you temporarily hold for the purposes of this conversation. Civil rights violations. Obstruction. My list is quite long. The U.S. attorney for this district is a very dear friend. It was clean. It was efficient. It was total. Miller and Davis wouldn't just be fired. They would be erased. I looked over at Miller. He was on his knees now, his hands still on his head, staring at the soldier in front of him. But he wasn't looking at the soldier. He was looking past him, at me. His face wasn't angry anymore. It was crumbling. He was seeing his career, his identity, his whole world dissolving in the searchlight of a Blackhawk he couldn't possibly explain. Make the offer, I told Shaw. Shaw nodded to Stone. Stone walked over and knelt in front of Miller, speaking in a low, conversational tone that was drowned out by the helicopters. I watched Miller's face cycle through confusion, indignation, and finally, utter, soul-crushing despair. He nodded jerkily. So did Davis. It was over. The helicopters began to ascend, the soldiers melting back towards their ropes. The roar began to recede. Shaw was already getting back in his car. In 5 minutes it would be as if none of this had ever happened. It was almost perfect. But as Stone walked back towards me, his face was still grim. He stopped at the steps again. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low, "there's a complication. The officer's body cam. It wasn't just on. It was live streaming to his precinct's internal server." My blood ran cold. "Who saw it, Sergeant?" "We're not sure," he admitted, his face tight with concern. "But the feed was active for the entire encounter. Anyone with access could have been watching." He paused, and the look in his eyes told me the worst was yet to come. Including his partner. The one who stayed in the car at first. He radioed for backup before we could jam his comms. He said an officer was in trouble. The words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. The roar of the departing helicopters was replaced by a new sound, a familiar sound, growing closer from a few blocks away. It wasn't the surgical precision of my unit. It was the messy, frantic sound of brute force, sirens, dozens of them, and they were all heading our way. The wail of the sirens grew into a chaotic symphony. Red and blue lights began to strobe against the houses at the end of the street, painting the trees in frantic, flashing colors. My team, halfway to the ropes, froze. They turned as one, weapons snapping back to a ready position, facing the oncoming threat. The Black Hawks, which had started to ascend, halted their climb and held their position, 2 dark angels of death hanging in the sky. Shaw, who had one foot in his sedan, swore under his breath and slammed the door shut, striding back towards me. "This is escalating outside of projected parameters," he said, his professional calm finally cracking. "The chief is on his way, and he's bringing half his department with him." "They think one of their own is under attack," I said, my mind racing through tactical scenarios. "This is a powder keg. Stone, get our people back on the ground, full defensive perimeter, non-lethal protocols. I don't want a single shot fired unless it comes from them." My operators slid back down the ropes with fluid efficiency, forming a semicircle around the porch and the 2 disgraced officers, their rifles pointed down, but their posture radiating lethal intent. They were a black-clad wall between my mother's house and the approaching cavalry. The first of the Northwood police cars screeched to a halt at the end of the block, then another and another, until the street was choked with them. Doors flew open and officers poured out, taking cover behind their vehicles, pistols and shotguns drawn. In the lead, a portly man in a white shirt with scrambled eggs on his hat, the chief of police stepped out, using his car door as a shield. He held a bullhorn. "This is Chief Henderson," his amplified voice boomed, distorted and tinny, "to the unidentified armed individuals. You are surrounded. Lay down your weapons and step forward with your hands in the air." The absurdity of the situation was staggering. A small-town police chief was demanding the surrender of a Tier 1 Special Operations unit on a direct order from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Stone looked at me, a glimmer of dark amusement in his eyes. "Your orders, Commander?" "Hold your position," I commanded. "Let them posture." Shaw stepped forward, his suit looking ridiculously out of place in the sea of tactical gear and drawn weapons. He held his hands up in a placating gesture. "Chief Henderson, my name is Stephen Shaw. I'm with the Department of Justice. There has been a misunderstanding." "I don't care if you're Santa Claus," Henderson yelled back. "You have 2 of my officers on the ground and what looks like a private army in my town. My men have their weapons trained on you. You have 10 seconds to comply before we open fire." This was the tipping point. One jumpy cop, one misinterpreted movement, and my mother's street would become a free-fire zone. I knew then that hiding in the shadows wasn't an option. Shaw's explanations and Stone's silent intimidation weren't enough. They needed to see who was in charge. They needed to understand the mistake they were making on a personal level. "Stone, with me," I said. I walked down the porch steps, past my operators, and into the no-man's land between the 2 forces. Stone was a half-step behind me, and to my right, a loyal shadow. The spotlights from the cruisers pinned us, making us the center of the entire world. I kept my hands open and away from my body. I could feel the dozens of guns pointed directly at my chest. I stopped in the middle of the street and stared directly at Chief Henderson. "Chief," I called out, my voice carrying easily in the tense silence. "My name is Jasmine Hayes. This is my mother's house." Henderson squinted, lowering the bullhorn. "Hayes? Maria Hayes's girl? The one in the army?" "That's me," I said. "And these men," I gestured to Stone and my team, "are my soldiers. You can tell your officers to lower their weapons because they are currently pointing them at a commander in the United States Army Special Operations Command, acting under federal authority." A ripple of confusion went through the police line. They were expecting a gang, a terrorist cell, not the girl who used to bag their groceries at the local market. "Federal authority," Henderson sputtered. "What in God's name are you talking about? My men responded to a call of an officer in distress. They found Miller and Davis on their knees at gunpoint." "Your men were not at gunpoint," I said, my voice as cold and hard as the pavement beneath my feet. "They were being detained, because Officer Miller, in a fit of temper, decided to assault me on my own property. An act," I added, my gaze sweeping across his assembled officers, "that was captured on his partner's body camera." I saw the moment the pieces clicked into place for Henderson. He glanced back at Miller and Davis, who were still kneeling, their faces a portrait of shame. He knew them. He knew their reputations, their tempers, and he knew me, or at least the girl I used to be. Before he could respond, Shaw's phone buzzed. He answered it, listened for a moment, and then walked calmly over to the chief. He held out the phone. "It's the governor, Chief. He'd like a word with you. He sounds displeased." Henderson's face went slack. He took the phone like it was a venomous snake. As he listened, his shoulders slumped, and the color drained from his face. He mumbled a few "yes, sirs" into the receiver before handing it back to Shaw. He looked up, not at me, but at the helicopter still hovering, a symbol of a power so far beyond his comprehension that he could only stare. He then turned to his officers. His voice, now devoid of its earlier bluster, was barely a whisper. "Stand down. Everyone stand down. Holster your weapons." Slowly, reluctantly, the blue line of the Northwood Police Department dissolved. Guns were holstered. Shotguns were racked. The immediate threat was over. In the aftermath, Shaw handled the details with quiet, ruthless efficiency. Miller and Davis were escorted to an unmarked car and driven away, their careers over. Chief Henderson stammered apologies as he tried to disperse his bewildered officers, who kept stealing glances at me, at my team, as if seeing a ghost. My men boarded the helicopters. The ropes were drawn up, and with a final, deafening roar, they peeled off into the night sky, leaving behind only the rustling of leaves and a profound, ringing silence. Shaw gave me a final nod before his sedan disappeared down the street. It was over. The street was empty again, except for the abandoned police cruiser. I walked back to the porch. The door opened, and my mother was there. She didn't say anything. She just wrapped her arms around me, holding me tight. I buried my face in her shoulder, the scent of her rose perfume filling my senses, and for the first time that night, I let myself tremble. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, stroking my hair. "You're home now. You're safe." I pulled back and looked at her. In her eyes, I didn't see a Delta Force commander or a federal asset. I just saw her daughter. The woman who had been slapped was gone, and the soldier was on her way back to the shadows where she belonged. What was left was just me, Jasmine, standing on the porch where I grew up. The red mark on my cheek was already fading, but I knew, and the whole town would soon know, that some lines once crossed can never be redrawn. I had come home for peace, and instead I'd had to bring my war with me. But now, looking at my mother's face, I finally felt the peace I had been searching for. The battle was over. I was home,